His world had been entirely defined by his deeply religious and domineering mother. Her death that December left him for the first time on his own. Living alone in an isolated farmhouse outside Plainfield, Wisconsin, the 39-year-old earned money by helping the townspeople with odd jobs or working on threshing crews.
From the time I was pretty small, Eddie Gein was always just, you know, part of the crew. From where our farm was, he was about 2.5 miles away is all. And we'd get in the car and go over and see Eddie. We'd pull into his yard, and I can still remember doing that. And Eddie would always come out and talk to us in the yard. So we never was in his house or anything like that.
He was not the, you know, the village idiot. That's for sure. The housewives in town, they would trust him. You know, can you fix this? I got a door that squeaks at, or, you know, can you fix the hinge on my door? Sure, I come over.
He was a hard worker. When you paid him $1, you had $1.50 worth of work out of him. I mean, he didn't slack off. He wouldn't screw anything up. I think that everybody treated him, even though he was maybe a little, what you'd think, a little different, but Eddie was Eddie.
Oftentimes, when the threshing crews broke for lunch, the women would provide them with meals.
When you listen now, the women that would talk about it, they felt kind of funny when Ed would look at them. He would give off kind of a funny, it made him uncomfortable the way he would stare at them.
Something about his eyes that bothered me. I didn't feel like he was a person I would trust. Strange.
Gein had a reputation around town as odd, yet harmless. Behind closed doors, however, he struggled to cope with life after Mother. Psychiatrists who interviewed Gein concluded that during the years after his mother's death, his psychological problems crossed the line into psychosis.
Mr. Gein's mother's death affected him tremendously. He had no other person to communicate with or talk with. And consequently, he just turned to his inner fantasies, his other interests, and found that without Mother, he didn't know what he was going to be doing.
He would come home to this empty, decaying farmhouse. Again, that was without electricity, that was without indoor plumbing. He was completely isolated.
Gein's mother had left him terrified of human contact, of women in particular. His loneliness, however, drove him to seek his own perverse sort of companionship. At some point, Gein said, he began to make nighttime raids on local cemeteries.
Ed was a reader of the obituaries. He was fascinated by who had just passed away.
Ed would find out when the service was going to be, where the burial was going to be, and as quickly as he could get there in the dark of night, he would go and open that grave and get that body.
Mr. Gein substituted seemingly dead bodies for the activities that he had with his live mother before. If Mother was gone, he needed someone who literally could take her place.
Gein took these desires to ghoulish extremes. Though it remains a mystery if he ever engaged in either sex with the corpses or cannibalism, some of the discoveries police would later make defied comprehension.
There was what the police called a mammary vest, the upper torso of a woman that Gein had taken from the body and preserved and attached straps to. And then there were leggings that had been made from the skin of a woman's legs.
And at times, it was reported that he would sometimes walk around with this mammary vest that he had managed to make from female anatomy, and he would attach it to his body.
And apparently also sometimes take one of the female genitals that he had removed from a corpse and stick those on himself as well and pretend to be a woman.
Eventually, however, violating the dead was not enough to satisfy Gein's morbid urges. It was around this time that he began patronizing Hogan's Tavern, a local watering hole owned by the bawdy, tough-talking Mary Hogan.
That was one bar that hunters would, you know, after you hunt long all day. You generally stop and have a soda pop. And I recall she was very huge and very jovial and joked a lot. Her nickname was Bloody Mary.
Mary Hogan was indeed a dirty talker. She spoke in profanity like a truck driver or a sailor or whatnot.
I think when Ed Gein saw Mary Hogan, he saw some kind of grotesque, dark mirror image of his mother.
On the afternoon of December 8th, 1954, a local farmer stopped into Hogan's Tavern to pick up some ice cream for his daughter.
He goes into the bar, and he knew immediately that something was wrong. There was blood all over the floor, and there was money on the floor, and he just turned around and beat it out of there.
Mary Hogan was nowhere to be found.
When Mary Hogan turned up missing, there was talk about, they said they felt she'd been murdered, and she just was missing, and they just could not find her to go to heck for it.
Police explored what few leads they had. Ed Gein was never questioned. No one considered him a suspect. It was too far-fetched to imagine that the quiet, hard-working bachelor could possibly be a killer.
I can still remember, somebody said, well, I wonder where Mary Hogan is. Well, he said, she's over by my place. He said, I got her over there. And everybody said, yeah, Eddie, you got her. Yeah, we know Eddie, yeah.
As the leads petered out, it started to look like Mary Hogan's disappearance would remain unsolved. 16th, 1957, when police found her face in a paper bag in Ed Gein's kitchen.
Maybe he felt he wanted to incorporate her into his home, and this was his way of bringing home a bride. But he brought her home as a corpse.
As 1957 drew to a close, the people of Plainfield, Wisconsin were still reeling from the nightmare visited on their town. Ed Gein had been charged with the murder of hardware store owner Bernice Warden. But the discovery of his many other hideous offenses had brought instant infamy to Plainfield, along with a horde of reporters from around the world.
This was the crime of the country at this particular November in 1957. And it had just brought in basically the Western world's press.
Had you ever been in the man's house? No, sir. Never been in there. I'd like to talk now. Your name?
As the incident wore on and it became so much a front page issue that lots and lots of people were saying, when can it just die down? When can it go away?
It was disturbing to the population. We didn't really appreciate all of the media attention.
I was stopped on the street once by a reporter from England, but I just said that I had nothing to say and no comments to make, and walked on.
Outside of Plainfield, a different kind of response was taking hold. The spread of what came to be known as Gein humor.
Well, I believe that the jokes sort of was an outlet for how everyone felt and the fear that they felt.
One of them was, what was Ed's favorite dessert? And he says, lady fingers.
Ed Gein gave his girlfriend a present on Valentine's Day. It was a box of farmers' fannies, you know.
There were actually people thrown out of the restaurant in Plainfield for going and ordering Gein burgers and things.
On January 6, 1958, hearings began to determine if Ed Gein was competent to stand trial for Bernice Warden's murder. Doctors who had evaluated Gein testified that he suffered from schizophrenia. They said he was prone to hallucinations and delusional thinking and believed he was an instrument of God with the power to raise the dead.
You know, he'll talk about the most incredible, extraordinary horrors that are totally inconceivable to any normal person, but he does it in the tone as though he's talking about going to the grocery, you know, to buy his provisions for the week.
In the end, the doctors said it all came back to Mother.
This is the duality of